Jersey Shore boardwalk is a place of energy. Bright neon lights flickering over bustling gift shops, the shrill chime of arcade games, the rhythmic crash of waves against the wooden pillars beneath. It has a pulse of its own, fueled by laughter, overpriced food, and the carefree nature of summer nights. But once the crowd thins and the shops close, that pulse slows. The flashing lights grow dimmer, the sounds fade, and something about the boardwalk feels different. As if, when the last tourists leave, something else takes their place. It was a warm July night when Ryan and his friends were wandering the boardwalk, delaying the inevitable end to their summer outing. The crowd had thinned to just a few late-night stragglers. The smell of deep-fried food still lingered, but the vendors were already locking up. Even the carnival rides had shut down, their mechanical laughter silenced until the next day. Ryan lagged behind as they walked, pausing at the railing to take one last look at the ocean. The water was black, stretching out endlessly beneath the pale moonlight. He was about to turn back when something caught his eye. Underneath the pier, where the wooden beams plunged into the sand, something moved. At first, he thought it was just a piece of trash caught in the wind, but then it shifted again, deliberately. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, focusing on a shape wedged between the beams. A pair of pale hands gripped the edge of the pier. They weren't reaching for anything, weren't adjusting their grip, just resting there, fingers curled over the wood, completely still. A cold unease crept up Ryan's spine. He squinted, trying to see if there was a person attached to those hands, but the darkness beneath the pier was too thick. He took a step closer. That's when the hand slid away, not in a fumbling, human-like motion, but smoothly, silently, as if whatever was lurking under there had been watching him, waiting for him to notice. A soft scraping sound followed, like something dragging against the sand. Ryan's breath hitched. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn around and leave. He didn't even process himself backing away until he bumped into one of his friends. "Dude, what's wrong?" Ryan swallowed hard and pointed toward the pier. There was something under there. His friends, half annoyed and half intrigued, walked over and peered into the shadows. One of them pulled out their phone, the screen's glow weakly illuminating the damp beams and seaweed-covered sand. Nothing. Ryan took a shaky breath, trying to convince himself that maybe he had imagined it. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Still, something in the pit of his stomach told him otherwise. They laughed it off, made some joke about him seeing ghosts, and continued walking. Ryan forced himself to keep up, but the lingering sense of unease followed him all the way to the parking lot. Later that night, long after he'd gone home, he found himself thinking about those hands. The way they had just been there, waiting, and the way they had disappeared. Not clumsily, not in a way that suggested a person scrambling away, but in one single, fluid motion. Something about it felt wrong. The next day, curiosity got the best of him. He looked up stories about the boardwalk, searching for anything strange, and that's when he found it. Years ago, a man had drowned near that pier. A vagrant, reportedly living beneath it, had disappeared one night and was later found washed up on shore. Some said he had been hiding from something. Others believed he had never actually left. Ryan tried to brush it off as a coincidence. Maybe he had seen a piece of driftwood. Maybe his mind had played tricks on him. But deep down, he knew what he had seen. Something had been under that pier, and it had been watching him. The boardwalk had its fair share of urban legends, stories about haunted piers, sunken ships, and missing people. But one story stood out. At the far end of the boardwalk, past the arcades and food stands, sat a run-down funhouse that nobody seemed to remember being built. Its paint was cracked, the entrance dimly lit by a flickering neon sign that simply read, "Mirrors." It was always open, yet never crowded. The few who entered either left with an odd sense of unease or never spoke of it at all. Some claimed the layout inside changed each time. Others swore they heard footsteps following them, even when alone. That summer, Lena wandered the boardwalk alone. She had planned to meet a friend, but they cancelled last minute, leaving her with time to kill. The night air was thick with humidity, the smell of salt water mixing with fried dough and cheap perfume. The sounds of arcade machines, crashing waves, and distant laughter grew strangely muted the further she walked. Then she saw it. The funhouse stood at the edge of the pier, past the last string of boardwalk lights. She had been here countless times, yet she was sure this place had never been here before. The entrance was nothing more than a dark curtain, slightly parted, revealing a dim hallway lined with warped mirrors. A hand-painted sign beside the door read, $2 entry. Lena hesitated, then pulled out a crumpled bill and stepped inside. The moment she did, the air changed. The humidity vanished, replaced by a cold, stagnant stillness. The wooden planks beneath her feet creaked. The mirrors stretched her reflection into impossible shapes, some too tall and thin, others shrunken and unnatural. At first, it was amusing. Then, something felt wrong. The mirrors weren't just distorting her, they were delayed. Each step she took, her reflection followed a fraction of a second too late. When she tilted her head, there was a pause before her reflection copied the movement. A cold unease settled in her stomach. She turned a corner, expecting another hallway, but was met with rows of mirrors, stretching endlessly in every direction. There was no visible exit. She turned back. The hallway was gone. Her heartbeat pounded as she ran her fingers along the mirrors, hoping for a hidden door. But the more she moved, the more the reflections changed. At first it was subtle, a flicker of movement that didn't belong to her. Then it became undeniable. The mirrors were wrong. Some reflected an empty hallway behind her, though she had just walked through it. Others showed her standing still, even as she moved. One mirror didn't show her at all. A suffocating fear crept up her spine. Then she saw something else. In one of the mirrors, barely visible in the dim light, a figure stood in the reflection behind her. Tall, motionless. Its face blurred like a smudged photograph. Lena spun around. The hallway was empty, but when she turned back to the mirror, the figure was closer. A choked breath escaped her lips. She backed against the cold glass. Her own reflection stared at her, wide-eyed and frozen. Except she wasn't frozen. She was breathing, trembling. But her reflection did not move. It was still. Lena's chest tightened. The mirrored version of herself blinked too late. Then, ever so slightly, its lips curled into a faint, unnatural smile. Something was behind the glass. She ran. Her footsteps pounded against the creaking floor, mirrors flashing past her in a dizzying blur. Every turn led to another hallway of warped reflections. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, like the funhouse itself was closing in on her. And then, without warning, she was outside. She stumbled onto the wooden boardwalk, gasping. The warm, humid air wrapped around her, the distant sounds of arcade games and waves crashing returning all at once. The funhouse was gone. No neon sign, no entrance, just an empty stretch of pier where it had stood moments ago. She stood there for a long time, heart hammering, trying to convince herself it had been real. No one else on the boardwalk noticed anything strange. People passed her without a second glance, caught up in their own lives, as if nothing had happened. But Lena knew better. For weeks, she avoided mirrors. Something about them felt off, like if she stared too long, she'd see something she wasn't supposed to. Then, one night, while passing an abandoned storefront, she caught a glimpse of something in the glass. At first, it was just her own reflection, staring back. But then, it moved before she did. A faint delay. A smile that wasn't hers. She never went back to the boardwalk again. But the boardwalk never forgot her, and neither did the thing in the mirror. If these chilling stories kept you on edge, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more unsettling tales. New horrors await, so turn on notifications. And remember, the scariest stories are often the ones we can't explain.